Thank you.
So what are you excited about as CEO?
What am I excited about?
Yeah.
Well, it's a great time to be in this industry. I came to IO 4 years ago from the private sector because of the opportunity in front of us, because of the infrastructure we're building. The province, for more than a decade, the last 15 years, has had a real commitment to building. That's exciting for us, and these days that's true at all levels of government, and it's true not just here in Ontario. You look at other provinces, the federal government, municipalities, the US. So it's an exciting time to be in the industry for me, for colleagues, so that's one reason I'm excited. I guess second, in particular, because I think what we've done at IO, we always talk about an attitude of being proud but not satisfied. We're proud of what we've done in the short time since IO was created, and think we've come a long way. I think we've developed a kind of very made in Ontario, local, with the people in this room and many in industry, a local approach to getting infrastructure built. And if you look around the world, the challenge for the last 30 or 40 years hasn't been that people thought stuff didn't need to get built. Everyone has seen the need coming for a long time. The challenge has been more lack of confidence that we can get stuff built quickly, effectively, affordably. And so, it's exciting that we've developed a local approach to that. And I guess the last thing we said about Sean is I'm excited about our team and our people. IO is an organization that does merge between private and public sector. Most of the people we hire have worked in both places, understand how to navigate in a government environment, working with our partners, ministries, and agencies to deliver assets for them, but also working with industry. So I'm excited about working our team and the people we've got.
Well, let's just tease that one out a little bit more about building quickly and efficiently and appropriately. And there's a tendency now within Infrastructure Ontario and infrastructure projects generally across Canada, bigger projects. So if you would have gone 10 years ago and said, how many billion-dollar projects there are in the construction industry compared to how many billion-plus jobs there are now, you'd see quite a difference. So there's significantly more larger jobs. Jobs, the tendency is that they're getting bigger, not smaller. What kind of impacts does that have on the marketplace in a negative kind of way? And how does IO see themselves dealing with some of those potential negative impacts from the larger size jobs?
Well, first, I'd say I agree with half of your question, but let me change it slightly. There are more bigger projects, for sure, I agree with you. But there's also a lot more smaller projects or more diverse projects. If you look at what we were doing, certainly at IO 10 years ago, it was mostly social buildings. They were mostly greenfield, new buildings. We did a whole wave of those. They were all within, in terms of size, complexity, and type, kind of similar. We did 30 hospitals in a short period of time, and most of those were greenfield developments largely. Now, you're right, there are a lot more mega projects. That's true in some of the big new hospitals we're building, but it's really true on the transit side. And I'll talk about those and the challenges, because I agree with you. But let's also just remember, on the other hand, in the building space, we're doing more and more projects that are interesting, additions and renovations or retrofits to existing buildings. Some of those are smaller. And on our realty, the non-AFP portion of our business, we're doing a ton to invest in renewal of 40-plus-year-old government buildings and assets, improvements to heating and cooling systems, energy efficiency, building envelope stuff. So I would say more that we used to look like this, we look a lot more like this now. So anyway, I think we have to just remember that it's more diverse than anything. But
Well, for us, we mostly think of Infrastructure Ontario in terms of the new projects and the alternative financing, and we often forget about the real estate portfolio and the amount of work that Infrastructure Ontario is responsible for in managing the provincial government's assets. But just teasing out this issue of larger size projects and its impact on market capacity. Mm-hmm. And so, you hear this word a lot, this phrase a lot about market capacity. It means different things to different people. But some people would say, okay, we got projects that say are a $2 billion project. It's hard to find a project director who can do a $2 billion project.
Right.
And if there's more projects that are coming along at, a $2 billion, $3 billion, where do you get the project directors? Where do you get the project managers? How does that impact the industry's ability to successfully deliver on these jobs when there could be a crunch on that kind of talent?
That's a great question, and I'll say two things. We've been spending a lot of time lately at IO, as government more generally, and engaging with industry, with folks like you and many others, to talk about market capacity and try and tease out where the risks are. Interestingly, I think you've hit it, Sean. The biggest pinch point that we see is in that project management layer. When you get to the labor pool, most people will say, bring it on, we're ready. I think there's specific skilled trades where you could see pinch points coming, but honestly, our biggest concern probably is at the project management level, engineering oversight, and managing design. So some of those we do worry about. Our approach so far is, number one, to keep engaging them. Well, first we put out our pipeline. We every year try and publish our pipeline to give clarity, what's coming. We try and space things out appropriately so it doesn't all land on the same day. We try and space out the construction so we're not overwhelming the industry. We get feedback from many people, GCs and others, who say, you know what, that's 3 projects you've got landing right on, their construction season is going to be right on top of each other. You might want to space those out. And we do. We take that feedback. So we're trying to manage that a little bit. Going to the heart of your question, though, about big projects, here's what we're thinking about right now. It's one thing, you have to remember these big we're talking mostly about civil projects when we start talking about the mega projects. Yeah. And what's challenging with civil projects is they are a system. They are one project. A lot of people ask me the question you've asked in a different way. Why are you bundling these big projects together? And you got to start from we're not bundling different things together to make them big. They are big. They are one project. It's a system of stations, tracking between those stations, trains that run on them. So you have to start with the idea it is a big project. Right. So the question is does it ever make sense to break up a big project in order to manage it better? Right. And our answer is, yeah, it could. But you've really got to be careful because you are creating for yourself, as the owner, as government, a new risk of integration between players. So would you ever have to do that? Yeah. If the market tells you that it can't handle a project of that size, it doesn't have the capacity to do it, for sure we would have to look at that. But if we do, we have to also know that we're taking on a new role of managing those different partners. And it's not historically something governments have been great at. Right. So we don't start from that goal, but we know that it's a reality that we might have to look at.
So you think market capacity and its 3 different components. So we didn't really talk about contractor capacity and bonding ability, but contractor capacity, project management, supervisory, and labor capacity. Of those 3, what do you think is the area where you need to focus and the industry needs to focus the most on in order to successfully deliver that $160 billion pipeline of projects over the next 10 years?
Well, it's probably all 3 in some levels, and I think many in this room I know have been involved in some of the government's initiatives around thinking about apprentices, community benefits. How do we create the next generation of workforce? That's something we're piloting in some of our projects now and thinking about how do we help to seed that and build the pipeline of people who can keep working on these projects. So I'm excited about that because these projects, we put out our pipeline every year, but the projects that are on our pipeline, the $160 billion, that's a decade worth of work. And so you have to think about how the workforce is going to evolve over that decade. The project manager, the site superintendent that you have today is probably not the same person 10 years from now. You've got to be building the next generation. Right. So that one I feel like we're making good progress on. The one that I think we need to keep talking with industry about is at the supervisory management layer. How do you start to use current projects to train? How do you take someone from a smaller project environment and get them ready? Because it's a lot different, I'm told by many, how different it is to manage a $10 million, $100 million, billion-dollar project. It's essentially a different job. So how do you start to skill up people for those bigger end? That's probably the place I think we have the most to go.
Okay. All right. And you have an opportunity to respond to this question as well if you go to the surveys on your app. And the question is, with regard to market capacity, what do you think will be the biggest challenge to deliver IO's $160 billion project pipeline? So that's on your app. It's in the survey section there. Answer that. You can answer that question, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So we'll let some people respond to that. Some have responded already, but give that app a chance and respond to that survey question.
I like it.
The other thing that often comes up, Ehren, is when we talk about market capacity and ability to deliver on the jobs is foreign competition. I've been in quite a few meetings where foreign competition comes up. Is it right that we have such large multinational construction companies in our marketplace, Canadian taxpayer money, those kinds of things? What's IO's response to that big question about foreign competition and their influence on our marketplace?
Well, two thoughts, Sean. One, we have always recognized that to get projects done successfully, we're an execution shop. At the end of the day, we care about getting stuff built, as I said, affordably, quickly, and effectively, high quality. We have always known that to do that well requires strong local capabilities. What we describe when we do our qualification process, local knowledge. We've always recognized that a few years ago. Many in this room, any who participate in our program know we started introducing that as a more formal part of how we evaluate. Not for protectionism reasons, or not because we're trying to help keep out foreigners or help the local guy. None of that. It's self-interest. We're doing that because we know to get a project done well requires a knowledge of local labor markets, how to get stuff done in a municipality, how to get through regulatory process. It's just good contracting sense that you need that local knowledge. And so we feel strongly about that. That's why it's part of our qualifications. That said, we think it's also great that our market has seen the inflow of foreign players who often bring specialized expertise, have done, especially as we get into more unique areas, they've done some of these things before. And what we're seeing in this market, and it's many of you, we're not doing this, you guys are doing this, what we're seeing is partnering. And if you look at most of our successful projects, they have some element of local knowledge and capability, a ton of it, partnered with global expertise, sometimes global financial capacity, to your point, they can still fill some of that financial need. And over and over again in our bids, and as I say, we're not making that happen, the industry is, but we like it because we see the benefits of it in capability to deliver and global expertise.
So you think having the foreign actors within our marketplace is a net benefit to the ability to deliver these jobs?
We do, and as I say, we do. And we also think that having really strong local contractors and an industry is also really important.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a minute in terms of evolving the AFP model. And you touched on that a moment ago about community benefits and apprenticeship requirements and not necessarily mandatory minimums, but apprenticeship plans as part of the RFQ process and so on. What else are you doing to evolve the AFP model? I know there was a vendor performance initiative that was just put underway. How's that working? What else are you doing to help improve the AFP model?
So I talked about us being proud and not satisfied, and so it's interesting. Every time we do one thing, our list of things we need to tackle it never gets smaller. It feels like we always can see the next thing. You hit on a few of them. I'll start by saying this. Each of the things we do is a response, right, Sean? It's something we've learned through the 90 or so projects that we're up to now. Right. Local knowledge is an example of that. We started to see that we weren't always getting that in our projects. Vendor performance is a response to that, where we felt as the public sector, we didn't have the protections if there's repeated patterns of underperformance in a contractor. We had really no way of managing that. And as a public sector, we're all about fair, open, transparent evaluation. But at some point, you also remember the other half of our mission around protecting the public interest. And it becomes a problem when a contractor's done 5 and 10 projects with us with some repetitive systemic problems, and we have an 11th one out, and we get it, and we say, well, we know what happened on the last 10, but, well, we got to score them based on our scoring criteria, and we've got no way to recognize the past performance. That's where, so as I say, each of them are responses to what we've dealt with. Yeah. I'd say a few big ones that I'd love to highlight. Safety's been a big push of ours. Our introduction of CORE as a requirement on our AFP projects, increasing reporting from our contractors, independent audits. So there's quite a bit we're working towards on making sure we're not the constructor, but we have a role in health and safety, and we have a role of lifting the whole industry as a big owner. So we're trying to play that role, and I think that's one of the areas we're working on. 2 others I'd highlight that I've heard from many people in the industry. One is around getting the balance right between being prescriptive in what we ask for versus output oriented. If you think of the AFP model, they're all design build for the most part oriented, and so our goal is to try and create room for innovation. Over the last decade, the feedback we get from many people is that is slowly eroding. And increasingly, when we put out an output spec, it's getting more and more prescriptive about what it wants, and that's taking away room for the private sector to do its job and innovate. So that's one of the initiatives on our plate, is how do we get that balance right?
Right.
And one more I'd add is, which we've heard a lot of feedback about, is how do we streamline our bidding process, the RFP process in particular. It's long, it's time consuming, it's expensive. We ask for a lot of stuff. And I think the exercise we're undertaking is how do we streamline that, make sure the stuff we're asking for is all stuff we need to evaluate effectively. Hopefully by doing that we can shorten timelines and take down cost for bidders.
So is this a continuous improvement process at IO? So you're always evaluating how you're doing things and how you might be able to improve them as you go from one year to the next or from one project to the next?
Exactly, and we have a group internally from every part of our organization that sits on this working group, our continuous improvement working group, who's constantly identifying those next things, putting in place solutions, rolling them out into our template, getting them to market tested, fixing them where they don't work, because you don't always get them perfect the first time. We try and consult and get input up front. Rather that. Sometimes though, you put it out and then you learn to tweak it also. So yeah, that's the process we undergo. It's been a big part of our culture. As I said, if we don't keep doing that, at some point we'll fall behind.
Right. How many people work at IO?
IO is it's almost 500 people in total.
Yeah.
The realty, I mean, again, we talk so much about AFP, but on the realty side of our business, we are the landlord, property manager, asset manager for the province. Right. So we have folks in every region of the province. We're the second largest real estate holder in Canada. The biggest is the feds. So we're managing a pretty big real estate portfolio, signing leases, buying and selling properties. Right, yeah. So that team actually is more of our resources, although today we've been talking more about the AFP.
I bet if you would ask the audience how many people worked at IO, I'm not sure too many would have guessed 500 people working at IO. No. All right. So, well, we like the fact that those projects keep coming. So, if that means you need to hire a few more people to get the projects out a little bit quicker, I don't think anyone would have an issue with that. Good. So, why don't we turn to our polling question and see what our audience says? And Ehren, maybe your eyesight's better than mine, but I'm not able to read that response up there.
The shortage of skilled labor, though, a third of the audience sees that as an issue. We do too. As I say, when we talk to industry more often, the answer we get is, don't worry, we can handle it. We're worried. For me, it's a bit longer. We have to think a bit longer term. As I said, we've got a long runway of projects in front of us, and we've got a workforce. You look at the demographics of it. So industry, our colleagues in advanced education, us all have a role to play in addressing that one, because it is also an issue.
Right, so I think the audience recognizes that as much as you did in your comments earlier. So innovation at the job execution level is a fairly challenging kind of thing for our industry to adopt to, or to adapt. What do you see as some big innovative initiatives coming forward from IO in the next little while?
Well, it's interesting because we believe that the AFP model that we're using, at the root of it, it's good for two things. It's good for sharing, mitigating, managing risk effectively between private and public sector, number one, and number two, it's good for spurring innovation. And if you don't, and that's at the heart of why we do the AFP. I mean, we don't do AFPs because we didn't wake up in the morning saying we need to do these. We don't wake up in the morning saying we need more private finance. That's actually a cost of doing it. It's not a benefit. The benefits are effective risk management and innovation. What's interesting when I say that to people, not to you, Sean, but when I say it to others, one of the most common responses you get is, well, yeah, but you're just building a building. It's just a road. What innovation? You didn't build a hospital on stilts, or you got to be careful, because innovation means much more than that for us. Mm-hmm. There is capital I, if you can say, innovation. We've seen people come up with innovative designs to our buildings, change orientations, change layouts in meaningful ways that make a hospital run better and take less space. You know, and so nurses and doctors are happy about patient flow, and the contractor can build it for a lot cheaper because they're putting on a smaller footprint with less construction. Right. So there is that kind of innovation, and it's been really successful. But the kind that we're actually probably more focused on these days is in the area you said is challenging. It's means and methods and process. Because innovation that gets us a transit asset a year faster is worth a lot. It's worth a lot to our society and in getting goods and people moving. So that's where our innovation is largely focused. And I'd say, Sean, what we're seeing, one example I give you, some people know the Eglinton Crosstown, our biggest project right now. There have been all sorts of innovative ideas on that project around, I don't know, mining of stations, and that's all to accelerate, to reduce the need to do utility relocations, for instance. Those innovations are the ones that we really see benefit from going forward because they get us done faster and they take risk out of the equation.
And innovations related to improving traffic flow through construction projects.
Great example. Yes, great example.
No one cares about that, do you? Improve traffic flow through construction projects, i.e. Gardner, et cetera, you know?
It's so interesting, Sean, because, you know, as I said, 10 years ago, our focus was on the building side, and you could put up hoarding, and your disruption to the community where you were working was limited. Doing all of our transit work in and around the GTHA is very different, and how do you manage disruption is a huge part of where we need to be innovative. And what we've been doing in our recent bids is to have basically a concept lane rentals. So the bidders actually bid in their bids for number of hours of lane closures, in peak and off peak. And there's a price to that. So when you bid, when I evaluate you, not real dollars, but when I evaluate you, I actually add for whatever hours, you're buying those hours, if I can say it that way, in your bid. Yeah. So we're weighing it in part of your bid. Now, you win, flip into construction, and now you have to manage within the hours you bought. And if you go over them, there is a cash payment. Right. So there's a real incentive both to bid it effectively and also to manage it in time.
Okay.
That's an innovation we're really proud of, and we think we can do even better with it, by the way. Now the question is, do we have that price set at the right level? Because what you want is for the contractor to make decisions like, boy, if we work overtime, we'll avoid this lane closure. So we want them to be able to make trade-offs. So I'm not saying we've got it perfect yet, but it's an area we're really
I never realized this. So it's right in the bid document, and then there's a cash incentive to
stick
comply
to what
with
you
the
bid.
amount of lane hours that you said would be closed.
Correct.
Wow. Oh, that's very interesting. That's very innovative. And Ehren, thanks very much for this armchair chat. We really appreciate the great work that you're doing at Infrastructure Ontario. And I'm going to ask Mike York to come forward and formally thank you. So
thank you.
thanks, Ehren.
Thanks, Sean.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.